An elderly woman humiliated at a bank sparks a shocking takeover when Bruno Mars arrives, exposing secrets, power, and compassion in a cinematic drama. Ma'am, step aside. This line is for real customers. The teller snapped, her voice slicing through the marble hall just as the old woman's trembling hands scattered documents across the polished floor. The bank smelled of cold metal and lemon polish. A cathedral of glass and money where whispers echoed louder than prayers. People froze mid-step. Phones dipped. A security guard shifted his weight, already bored, already judging. The woman knelt to gather her papers, the bones in her fingers thin as reeds, her breath shallow, her eyes fixed on the floor as if the tiles could swallow her whole. Her name was Eleanor Hayes, though no one asked. They never did. She wore a coat too heavy for the season, the kind chosen for pockets rather than fashion, and a knitted hat that had once been blue. Inside her coat were letters folded and refolded until the creases felt like scars. She had rehearsed this visit for weeks. What to say, how to smile, where to stand. She had practiced not crying. I just need to withdraw what's mine, Eleanor said softly, her voice a paper boat on rough water. My husband, he passed. The account. The teller's smile didn't reach her eyes. Do you have valid ID? She glanced at the line behind Eleanor, already impatient, already cruel in its quiet way. Eleanor handed over a card with shaking fingers. The teller squinted, tapped her keyboard, frowned. This account is flagged, she said, louder now, the word flagged landing like a stamp. We can't process this. Flagged. The word fluttered through the hall. Eleanor felt it lodge in her chest. She had known this could happen. She had known the past doesn't stay buried just because you want it to. I have the documents, Eleanor whispered, gesturing to the floor, to the mess of her life. Please. A manager appeared, tall and immaculate, his cologne sharp. What seems to be the issue? He asked, already forming an answer. The teller gestured. Irregularities. Possible fraud. The word fraud struck Eleanor harder than the teller's tone. She stood too quickly, dizzy. The room tilted. Memories surged, the hospital room humming, her husband's hand cooling in hers, promises made in whispers. She had promised she would be brave. I would never, Eleanor said, and something old and iron-hard rose in her voice. I would never steal. The manager's gaze slid over her like a receipt scanned and discarded. Ma'am, we need you to step aside. That was when the doors opened and the air changed. It wasn't the way the doors swung, smooth and quiet, or the flash of daylight spilling onto marble. It was the sound, shoes against stone with a rhythm that felt familiar, a confidence that bent the room. Conversations faltered. Someone gasped, too loud. Someone else laughed, a reflex. Bruno Mars walked in as if he belonged everywhere and nowhere at once, wearing a simple jacket and a cap pulled low, sunglasses hiding eyes that had seen arenas and dressing rooms and nights that glittered and burned out. He had come for a meeting, a private one, the kind arranged weeks in advance, but he stopped short when he saw Eleanor's papers on the floor and the way she held herself, bracing for impact. Hey, he said, gently, and the word carried. What's going on? The manager blinked, recalibrating. Sir, if you'll excuse us. Bruno didn't look at him. He crouched instead, gathering the fallen papers with care, as if each page could cut. He smelled dust and ink and the faint lavender of Eleanor's coat. He read as he stacked. Names, dates, a handwriting that trembled but held on. Eleanor stared at him, disbelief softening into something like hope, which frightened her more than humiliation ever had. You don't have to, I know, Bruno said. But I want to. He handed her the stack, their fingers brushing. He felt her tremor, felt the room watching. He stood and removed his sunglasses. I'm Bruno, he said, not as an introduction but as a truth that would ripple. Murmurs broke free. Phones rose again, stealthier now. The manager found his voice. Mr. Mars, we have protocols. This is an internal matter. Then handle it like it matters, Bruno replied, his tone calm. The calm of someone who had learned that anger wastes time. Because it looks like you're treating her like she doesn't. Eleanor swallowed. Part of her wanted to disappear. Another part, older, buried, straightened. The teller shifted, defensive. The account is flagged. We can't just, show me, Bruno said. That's confidential. Bruno smiled, not unkindly. So is dignity. A pause stretched, thick. The manager weighed optics, weighed power. Finally, he gestured toward an office. We can discuss this privately. No, Bruno said. We'll discuss it here. He turned to Eleanor. May I? She nodded, heart pounding. He took the papers, scanned them with an intensity that surprised her. He had grown up watching his mother count bills at a kitchen table, had learned early the smell of fear when money runs thin. Fame hadn't erased that. This account, Bruno said, was opened 43 years ago. Joint holders. There was a freeze placed last month due to an automated review triggered by a name match. The teller frowned. We can't disclose. It's a common name, Bruno continued. Eleanor Hayes. The system flagged it against a watch list without verifying date of birth or address. That's not fraud. That's laziness. Silence. The manager's jaw tightened. Eleanor's breath hitched. She hadn't known. She had assumed guilt was inevitable, that systems were gods you didn't question. Fix it, Bruno said. We'll need time, the manager replied. You've had time, Bruno said softly. She hasn't. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, tapped. I'm calling my attorney. And my accountant. And my publicist, if necessary. I don't want to. But I will. The word publicist shimmered like a warning light. The manager imagined headlines. Imagined the bank's name stitched to cruelty. He imagined shareholders. Let's review the flag, he said quickly. They did. Right there, screens turned, steps explained. Errors surfaced like fish in clear water. The teller's shoulders slumped. The guard exhaled. I'm sorry, the manager said, the words practiced but not empty. We made a mistake. Eleanor felt something unclench. Tears blurred the lights. She pressed her lips together, determined. Your funds will be available immediately. The manager continued. Bruno handed Eleanor her papers. You okay? She nodded, then shook her head. I will be. He smiled. That's honest. As the transaction completed, as the receipt printed with a whir that sounded like relief, Eleanor felt the weight in her coat lighten. Not just money, but vindication. She turned to Bruno, searching for words. My husband, she said, because some truths need witnesses. He loved your music. Said it made the world kinder. Bruno felt his throat tighten. He thought of his mother, of promises whispered into the dark. I'm glad, he said. When Eleanor left the bank, the doors opened for her like an apology. Outside, the sun warmed her face. Inside, the bank breathed again, changed in small ways it wouldn't notice until later. Bruno stayed a moment longer, speaking quietly with the manager about training and systems and the cost of forgetting humanity. Then he put his sunglasses back on and walked out, just another man in a city that would talk about this for days. Eleanor walked home with steadier steps. The city smelled of bread and rain. She thought of her husband, of promises kept. The world hadn't become kind all at once, but for a moment, it had bent toward justice, and that was enough. Turn off the cameras, the regional director said into his phone, his voice tight. Just as Bruno Mars closed the glass door of the executive conference room behind him, the room smelled of espresso and panic. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city like a promise no one in the room fully believed anymore. Four executives sat stiffly around the table, their tailored suits suddenly feeling like costumes. On the wall-mounted screen, a paused news clip showed Eleanor's face, mid-blink, frozen at the exact moment dignity returned to her posture. Bruno didn't sit. You can leave them on, he said calmly, nodding toward the cameras. Transparency's expensive, but silence costs more. The director swallowed. This is spiraling faster than expected. That's what happens when you humiliate the wrong person on the right day, Bruno replied, finally pulling out a chair and turning it backward, resting his arms on the backrest. His voice was controlled, but beneath it burned something sharper. You didn't just mess up a transaction. You exposed a system. One executive scoffed, unable to stop himself. With respect, this bank handles millions of accounts. One elderly woman, Bruno's eyes snapped up. Say her name. The man hesitated. Eleanor Hayes. Say it again, Bruno said, softer now, which somehow made it worse. Eleanor Hayes. She's not a statistic, Bruno said. She's a mirror. And right now, the world doesn't like what it sees. Outside the room, staff whispered. Inside, tempers flared. This is being blown out of proportion because you're famous, another executive snapped. If this were anyone else, that's exactly the point, Bruno cut in. If this were anyone else, she'd still be flagged, still humiliated, still unheard. The director rubbed his temples. What do you want? Bruno leaned back, finally sitting properly. An audit. Public. Independent. And a policy change that gives frontline staff zero tolerance for dehumanizing customers. That could take months, the director said. Then you should have started months ago, Bruno replied. Silence settled again, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Across town, Eleanor sat at her small kitchen table, the afternoon light slanting across the worn wood. She held her receipt like a fragile artifact. The television murmured in the background, her name now spoken by anchors who had never known her fear. She turned it off. Her hands shook, not from weakness, but from something else. Anger, maybe, or grief finally given permission to breathe. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a letter she hadn't shown anyone at the bank. A letter she had sworn never to use. The envelope was yellowed, the seal broken and resealed too many times. Inside was a document stamped with a name the bank system had flagged for the wrong reasons and buried for the right ones. Her husband's signature rested at the bottom like a ghost. They still don't know? She whispered to the empty room. The phone rang. She stared at it as if it might bite. Mrs. Hayes? A voice asked when she answered. Yes. This is Daniel Reed. I'm an investigative journalist. I'd like to talk to you about what happened at the bank today. Eleanor closed her eyes. I don't want attention, she said. I know, Daniel replied gently. That's why people will listen. Downtown, Bruno stepped out of the bank's private exit into a swarm of questions. Bruno, was this staged? Are you planning to sue? Do you think the bank targeted her because of her past? He stopped walking. That word, Bruno said into the microphones, past. You all keep circling it like it's a crime. A reporter pushed forward. Is there something we don't know about Eleanor Hayes? Bruno's jaw tightened. He had sensed it too. The way the executive's eyes flickered, the way the system's error felt too convenient. If there is, he said carefully, it won't justify cruelty. That night, social media fractured into camps. Some praised compassion. Others dug hungrily into Eleanor's history, dredging up half-truths and old headlines, resurrecting a version of her she had spent decades surviving. By midnight, a photo surfaced. Eleanor, younger, standing beside a man whose name still made institutions flinch. Bruno saw it on his phone and felt his stomach drop. In her apartment. Eleanor watched the same image appear on her screen. She didn't cry. She reached instead for the letter, unfolded it fully for the first time in years, and let the truth stare back at her. I tried to protect you, she murmured, though she no longer knew to whom she was speaking. Across the city, systems began to move, stories collided, and something long buried clawed its way toward the light, not as a scandal, but as a reckoning that no amount of money could quietly erase. She did not answer it. Outside her window, the city buzzed as if nothing had changed, as if a woman's past hadn't just been ripped open and fed to strangers hungry for judgment. The photo kept replaying in her mind. Her younger self, stiff smile, standing beside a man whose shadow still reached into rooms like the bank, like the boardroom, like her own chest. They never let you out, she whispered as a knock landed on her door. Firm, not polite. Eleanor froze. She hadn't invited anyone. Mrs. Hayes, a voice called through the wood. It's Daniel Reed. We spoke earlier. She hesitated, then opened the door a fraction. Daniel stood there with tired eyes and a recorder he hadn't turned on yet. I said I didn't want attention, Eleanor said. And I said people would listen, Daniel replied. They're not just listening now. They're deciding who you are for you. She stepped aside reluctantly. The room smelled of tea gone cold and old books. Daniel glanced at the letters on the table. The receipt folded and unfolded until it was soft. They're saying your account was flagged because of your late husband's connections, he said carefully. They're saying the bank was protecting itself. Eleanor laughed, a sound so dry it startled even her. Protecting itself from what? Memory. Daniel leaned forward. From what your husband knew. Across town, Bruno stood in a dim rehearsal studio, pacing as his team argued around him. A giant screen showed headlines scrolling too fast to read. This is turning, his manager warned. They're reframing the narrative. Bruno stopped. Of course they are. Your name's attached now, the manager continued. If this becomes about corruption, about cover-ups, it already is, Bruno snapped. It always was. A publicist crossed her arms. We need to know what Eleanor Hayes is hiding. Bruno stared at her. She's not hiding. She's surviving. She was married to a man investigated for laundering money through international banks. The publicist shot back. That's not nothing. Bruno's voice dropped, and he was never convicted. Because witnesses disappeared, someone muttered. The room went quiet. Bruno felt heat crawl up his spine. He remembered Eleanor's hands shaking, the way humiliation had bent her shoulders long before anyone mentioned her husband. He grabbed his phone and dialed. Mrs. Hayes, he said when she answered, surprise evident in her breath. It's Bruno. Daniel looked up sharply. They're circling you. Bruno continued. I want you to hear it from me, not from a headline. Eleanor closed her eyes. I knew this would happen. Then tell me, Bruno said. What don't they know? There was a long silence, filled only by Eleanor's breathing and the distant wail of a siren. My husband wasn't innocent, she said finally. But he wasn't what they said either. Daniel's pen hovered. He kept records. Eleanor went on, her voice steady now, stripped of fear. Names, transfers, warnings. He planned to expose it. Then he got sick. Bruno felt his chest tighten. And the letter? Eleanor inhaled sharply. You don't know about the letter. I will, Bruno said. Sooner or later. She laughed softly. He left proof. Not for revenge. For protection. Mine. Daniel leaned forward. Protection from whom? From everyone. Eleanor replied. The next morning, the bank CEO appeared on television, his expression grave. We regret the incident involving Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, he said. However, recent revelations raise serious concerns about the integrity of. Bruno turned the TV off mid-sentence. That's it, he said. They're blaming her. His phone buzzed immediately. Unknown number. This is Robert Klein. A voice said smoothly. We need to talk. Bruno smiled without humor. Klein. The name Eleanor's husband had circled again and again in his notes. I was wondering when you'd call, Bruno said. You're making things difficult, Klein replied. This doesn't have to get ugly. It already is, Bruno said. For people who don't have your lawyers. Klein sighed. Mrs. Hayes married a dangerous man. That danger doesn't disappear because you feel sorry for her. You should be careful, Bruno replied quietly. People are listening now. So am I, Klein said. And I hear an opportunity. Bruno hung up at Eleanor's apartment. Daniel finally asked the question hanging between them. Why now? Why go to the bank yourself? Eleanor looked at the letter, then at the empty chair where her husband used to sit. Because hiding kept me alive, she said. But it never let me live. She stood and walked to the window, her reflection older, but unbroken. I was tired of being invisible. By evening, a statement dropped online. Leaked documents, fragments of Eleanor's husband's records, just enough to unsettle powerful people without revealing everything. Bruno read them in silence. Did you do this? His manager asked. Bruno shook his head. No, somewhere across the city. Eleanor folded the letter and slipped it back into her coat, her hands steady for the first time in years. The truth was no longer sleeping, and no one, banker, celebrity, or ghost from the past, could pretend it hadn't already begun to breathe. Her apartment lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. But the silence afterward felt staged, artificial, like the calm before a verdict. Eleanor stood frozen in the middle of her living room, the letter pressed to her chest, every instinct honed by decades of fear, whispering the same warning. You waited too long. Her phone buzzed. A text message, no name. You should have stayed invisible. Eleanor sank into the chair, her knees weak, the weight of the past pressing down harder than it ever had when she was young. Back then, fear had been loud. Now it was surgical. Across the city, Bruno burst through the doors of a private elevator, his jaw clenched, his patience gone. They threatened her, he said flatly, dropping his phone onto the conference table where his legal team waited. Not indirectly, not vaguely, directly. His lawyer exhaled. That changes everything. No, Bruno snapped. That confirms everything. A younger attorney spoke hesitantly. If Eleanor releases everything she has, it could trigger international consequences. People don't threaten unless they're cornered. Bruno leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Then they should have thought about that before humiliating her like she was disposable. Meanwhile, Daniel Reed sat in his car outside Eleanor's building. Engine off, notebook forgotten on the passenger seat. He hadn't planned to stay this long, but something in her voice earlier had unsettled him. He checked his phone. Missed call. Eleanor. He was already moving before he processed it. When Eleanor opened the door, her face was pale but composed, a calm too deliberate to be natural. They know, she said without preamble. Daniel stepped inside, locking the door behind him. Who? All of them, Eleanor replied. The ones my husband warned me about. The ones who shake hands in public and erase people in private. Daniel lowered his voice. What exactly did your husband leave you? Eleanor hesitated, then crossed the room to a hidden compartment beneath the floorboard. She knelt with effort, her joints protesting, and lifted out a small metal box. This, she said, placing it between them, is why he died afraid. Daniel stared. Is that records? Eleanor said. Transfers, shell companies, coded correspondence. And names. Daniel swallowed. Enough to destroy them. Enough to expose them. Eleanor corrected. Destruction was never his goal. A knock hit the door. Hard. 3 times, both of them froze. Mrs. Hayes, a male voice called. Police. Daniel's hand drifted instinctively toward his phone. Eleanor stood slowly, every movement measured. She opened the door. 2 officers stood there, faces unreadable. We've had a report of suspicious activity, one said. May we come in? Eleanor looked directly at him. From whom? The officer hesitated. That information isn't available. Behind them, a black sedan idled at the curb. Daniel felt a chill crawl up his spine. I want my lawyer present, Eleanor said. The officer's eyes flicked past her, scanning the room. This will be easier if you cooperate. Eleanor smiled faintly. Nothing about my life has ever been easy. Across town, Bruno was already on the phone again. If anyone touches her, he said coldly into the receiver, this stops being a scandal and becomes a spectacle. A familiar voice replied, amused. You think celebrity gives you leverage? I know exposure does, Bruno shot back. And I'm done playing nice. The officers backed off eventually, citing procedure, citing follow-ups, leaving behind silence thicker than before. Eleanor closed the door and leaned against it, shaking now that the danger had brushed past. I can't outrun this, she said quietly. Daniel met her gaze. Then don't. The next day, the bank released another statement, sharper this time, defensive, carefully worded. Within minutes, Bruno posted a single sentence online. Silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. The reaction was immediate. Support. Backlash. Threats. Praise. Everything at once. That night, Bruno visited Eleanor's apartment for the first time that he stood awkwardly in the small space, fame suddenly irrelevant. I'm sorry, he said, for dragging you further into this. Eleanor studied him, really looked at him, at the man who had stepped between her and humiliation without knowing her story. You didn't drag me, she said. You reminded me I still exist. She handed him the metal box that Bruno's breath caught. Are you sure? I'm tired, Eleanor replied. And I don't want to die afraid like my husband did. Bruno held the box carefully, as if it could explode. Outside, the city pulsed, unaware that its foundations were about to be tested by an old woman who had finally decided she was done being quiet. The 5th episode began with Bruno holding the metal box in both hands, its weight unfamiliar, heavier than gold, heavier than any award he had ever lifted. I don't want to be your shield, he said quietly, standing in Eleanor's living room as dawn bled pale light through the curtains. I want you to be seen. Eleanor sat opposite him, wrapped in her coat despite the warmth. Being seen is what scares me, she replied. But hiding is killing me. Bruno nodded, understanding more than he expected to. Fame had taught him that visibility could save you or destroy you, sometimes in the same breath. Daniel cleared his throat. He had barely slept, his phone buzzing all night with editors demanding access, sources offering silence in exchange for favors. Once this opens, he said, gesturing to the box, there's no closing it again. Then don't close it, Eleanor said. Aim it. They moved to a secure location by noon, a borrowed office with blank walls and humming servers. Lawyers arrived. Analysts followed. The box was opened carefully, reverently, like an archive of sins, folders, flash drives, handwritten notes in Eleanor's husband's meticulous script. One lawyer paled. This isn't just banks. Another whispered. These names, This goes into politics. Bruno leaned back, exhaling slowly. So that's why they were so confident. Eleanor watched faces change as truths assembled themselves in real time. Power Strip Bear always looked smaller than expected. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Mrs. Hayes, a man said smoothly. You're being irresponsible. Eleanor smiled faintly. I've been responsible my entire life. It didn't protect me. You're risking lives, the man insisted. Only the ones built on lies, she replied, and hung up. Bruno's phone lit up next. He didn't bother with pleasantries. You should stop, Robert Klein said. This ends badly for you. Bruno laughed once, humorless. You already ended it badly for her. You think people will thank you? Klein pressed. They'll turn on you. They always do, Bruno said. And then they listen. By evening, Daniel's article went live. Not sensational. Surgical. Names redacted, but patterns undeniable. Receipts attached. Eleanor's husband quoted posthumously, his voice calm, deliberate, damning. The world reacted like a struck nerve. Markets dipped. Statements flooded in. Denials sharpened. Lawsuits threatened. Eleanor watched from a chair beside Bruno as screens filled with chaos. They're calling me reckless, she murmured. They're scared. Bruno corrected, but a knock interrupted them. This one polite. Control point. 2 federal agents entered, badges visible, posture respectful. Mrs. Hayes, one said, we'd like to speak with you. Eleanor stood, heart pounding, but her spine straight. Am I under arrest? No, the agent replied. You're a witness. Bruno stepped forward instinctively. I'm staying. The agent nodded. That's acceptable. Hours passed in a room that smelled of coffee and consequences. Eleanor answered questions steadily, truth finally flowing without obstruction. When she faltered, Bruno's presence grounded her, a quiet reminder that she wasn't alone. At the end, the agent closed his folder. Your husband tried to do the right thing, he said. I'm sorry it took this long. Eleanor felt tears sting her eyes, unexpected, uninvited. So am I. When they stepped outside, night had fallen. The city looked different now, sharper, less forgiving. Bruno turned to her. What do you want to do next? Eleanor considered the question, the freedom in it. I want to go home, she said. And tomorrow, I want to wake up without fear. Bruno smiled softly. That's a good plan. As they parted, Eleanor walked alone down the sidewalk, her steps slow but steady. People recognized her now. Some stared. Some nodded. One woman whispered, thank you. Eleanor didn't answer. She didn't need to. For the first time in decades, the weight on her chest felt lighter, not gone, but bearable. The truth had cost her everything she had left to lose, and in return, it had given her something fragile and powerful. Eleanor woke before dawn, the city still holding its breath, the air cool against her skin as she stood by the window of her apartment. For the first time in years, she had slept without jolting awake from imagined footsteps or ringing phones. Silence no longer felt like a threat. It felt earned. On the kitchen table lay the letter, unfolded, finally allowed to exist in the open. She traced her husband's handwriting with a gentle finger, not with sorrow this time, but with understanding. You did it, she whispered. We did. Across town, Bruno sat alone in a dim studio, guitar resting untouched beside him. Headlines scrolled on his phone, arrests confirmed, investigations widened, resignations announced. Names once untouchable, now spoken with careful distance. His manager called. It's over, she said. As over as it can be. Bruno closed his eyes. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt quiet. Later that morning, Eleanor stepped into the courthouse, not as a defendant, not as a spectacle, but as a woman finally standing in her own truth. Cameras waited outside, but inside, the room was small, human. She spoke calmly, clearly, her voice steady as she recounted years of fear, love, and waiting. When it was done, no one applauded. They didn't need to. Outside, Bruno waited. Not in front of the cameras, but a few steps away, where shadows softened the noise. It's finished, Eleanor said. Bruno nodded. How do you feel? She thought about it. About the bank floor, the humiliation, the threat-filled nights, the weight of secrets pressing her spine into a curve for decades. I feel tall, she said. He smiled. Weeks passed. The world moved on the way it always did. Too fast, too distracted, but something fundamental had shifted. Policies changed. Names were removed from buildings. Training manuals rewrote themselves in quieter ways. Eleanor returned to ordinary things. Morning walks. Tea with neighbors who now greeted her by name. She planted herbs on her windowsill and watched them grow, a small act of faith. One afternoon, a letter arrived, no threats this time. No warnings, just a simple envelope from Bruno. Inside was a note, handwritten. You reminded the world that dignity doesn't expire. Thank you for reminding me too. She smiled, folded it carefully, and placed it beside her husband's letter. That evening, Eleanor walked past the bank. The doors opened automatically. A young teller looked up and smiled. Genuine this time. Good evening, ma'am, she said. Eleanor nodded back and kept walking. She didn't need to go inside anymore. The city lights flickered on, one by one, and Eleanor moved forward with them. Not invisible, not afraid, just present.